Hello everyone, welcome back to story time. Today we will finish reading The Nutcracker. Chapter 3. Cranch, cranch, cranch. There was that sound in the walls again. Maria sat up in bed, holding the quilt around her. How cold it was. She leaned from her bed to look at the sky. The snow had stopped falling and the moon had come out. She could see it glinting on the tiny tinsel wrapper of a candy on her bed table. She had brought it up for a good night's snack and had been too sleepy to eat it. She felt wide awake now, though she could not have slept very long, for it was a deep night. Cranch, cranch. They were louder than ever. Were they bigger mice, or were there more of them? She thought of the Christmas tree and the Nutcracker lying on the little bed with its thin cover. She wished she had brought him up here. Surely she have given him more covers, for the party room would be bitterly cold by now. Maria slid out of bed and into her slippers and wrapper. When she lighted her bedside candle lamp, the sound on the wall stopped abruptly. She opened the door quietly and went down the long, dark hall towards the stairs. Maria's velvet slippers muffled her steps. The stairs were carpeted and firm, and she went down them in complete silence. Even going into the big room made no sound, for the door was ajar, and she could pass through. Most of the room lay in shadow. Her candle beam lighted only a narrow strip of the floor. As she came in, it followed across the wall, up the tall owl clock. It picked out the dial, and then both golden hands pointed together to the owl's head on top. The owl stirred, then opened its eyes, and at that very instant the clock spoke, a loud, deep, and hollow "Whoo! Whoo! Whoo!" that echoed from wall to wall. The owl raised itself up and began beating its wings. The clock struck again and again as Maria went on to the toy cupboard. In front of it was the doll's bed, and there was the Nutcracker sound asleep. To her great joy, his mouth was peacefully closed, and the bandage had slipped off. He would get well. She started to take him up in her arms, and there came a sound, that sound, faintly. Cranch, cranch, cranchity cranch. The sound came again, closer and louder. Cranch, cranch. It was followed by the rattle of tiny running feet. A mouse's face appeared under the Christmas tree and vanished. Then another one much nearer. Oh, what a big and ugly mouse! He seemed to be getting larger and coming straight for Maria. At this moment her candle went out. A score of wicked little mouse eyes danced around the room. Terrified, Maria threw herself on the sofa and buried her face in the pillows. When she looked out again, there was a strange, dim light all over the room. She could not tell where it came from. Mice, large, fat, and nearly black mice, with long and stringy tails, were moving back and forth in a kind of planned activity, as if following orders. They had sharp little knives like swords, and they were assembling on the side of the room opposite of the toy cupboard. Maria noticed the strangest thing. The mice in the sofa and the table and chairs were getting larger and larger. The Christmas tree boughs reached out into the room, the needles growing much longer, and all of the ornaments were blowing out like little balloons, but keeping their various forms. The tinsel garlands were thick ropes of silver and gold. The doll's bed and Nutcracker in it were becoming nearly life-size. The room itself was expanding. Or was Maria growing smaller and smaller? She felt the sofa rising beneath her. The seat was already about 6 feet from the floor. She had better get off right away. She slid down the curving leg and touched the floor just a few feet from her doll's bed, which was now roomy enough for Maria herself. Nutcracker was gone. The room was in a great commotion. The mice, as big dogs, were crowding together across the room, lining up in regular rows. One of them gave a high shriek, flourished his knife, and the whole band came charging towards the cupboard. Their wiry black feet made that scratchy sound Maria knew so well. In another sound, the mice would have been upon her. In another second, the mice would have been upon her. But a bugle sounded, and the cupboard door opened, and a troop of wooden soldiers as large as the mice rushed out to engage them. Cannons were wheeled into position, and ball after ball, red, pink, white, and blue, was set in showers against the mice. But how strangely soft they were, more like big gumdrops. They seemed only to bounce off the mice's fat mice's fur. The bugle sounded again. A noble figure suddenly appeared at the head of the troops, in red trousers, blue coat, and plumed headdress. It was Nutcracker. He had drawn his sword. He turned halfway round to the first line of troops, gave a command, and led them straight into the front ranks of the mousy army. What fierce hand-to-hand combat followed! The soldiers stood there bravely, but their tin swords were no match for the knives and sharp teeth of the mice. Cranch! Cranch! Sounded the mouse's battle cry. Nutcracker signaled again, and the second line of soldiers ran into the fight. Pausing a few feet from the huddled foes, they fell to their knees and took aim with rifles. The savage mouse horde came. On them, eyes and teeth flashing. The riflemen fired. Their courage was not matched by arms of sufficient power, and the shots only tickled the tough skins of the mice. One or two squealed in pain. The rest were only made more angry. Nutcracker now summoned his defenses. The third rank came on at a run, guns lowered and sharp steel bayonets thrust forward. The mouse villains did not move and were about to be pierced through and through when they dropped on all fours. They scampered cunningly between the soldiers' legs, unbalancing many of them, which they had then carried off as prisoners. It seemed certain now that the toy cupboard with all its treasures would fall victim to the mouse army. At this moment a horrible creature appeared, largest of all the mice, his terrible eyes flashing from left to right, his whiskers vibrating with rage. He wore a headdress of 7 crowns. He was the Mouse King. He put himself in front of his cutthroat band, puffed himself up with pride, and prepared to lead them to the cupboard. Nutcracker, rather badly beaten, was directly in Mouse King's path. He stood as usual, feet planted together, holding his long, strong sword. The Mouse King had a club, black and dreadful to look at, and he had his very large, very sharp teeth. There has never been such a strange and furious encounter. The Mouse King feigned a terrible blow with his club, then darted under his raised weapon to give his foe a savage bite. But Nutcracker was made of iron, and the Mouse King hurt his teeth so severely that he became enraged. Taking his black club in both hands, he began beating Nutcracker mercilessly. But the brave soldier warded off the club with his sword. Quickly, Nutcracker followed that with a sharp thrust into his enemy's fat belly. But for all his fatness, the Mouse King was the quickest of the mice, and so expert at twisting and dodging and leaping and ducking this way and that, that Nutcracker could barely touch him lightly here and there. All the time he had to fend off the blows of the terrible club. Down, down, the blows kept falling on Nutcracker, head and shoulders. Maria had been watching the combat from her place on the sofa. She saw that Nutcracker could not last much longer, but she had no gun and no sword. What could she do? Her fear for Nutcracker made her both cunning and bold. She took off one velvet slipper. No longer afraid, she ran up to the Mouse King, and as he lifted his club high over his head, she threw the slipper right in his face. Astonished and enraged, the Mouse King deserted his opponent and raced after Maria. And that was just what she wanted. Immediately, Nutcracker came up behind the Mouse King and struck down the monster with his sword. Maria bounced into her doll's bed. She was not hurt at all. Nutcracker stood perfectly still for a moment. He was overcome with weariness and relief. His deep, drawn breathing was the only sound in the entire room. Or was that the thudding of his heart? He put away his sword. Suddenly he toppled over without bending like a toy. The horde of mice, who had thought their monarch invincible, fell down in grief and terror at his death. In another moment they gathered up his swollen body in their arms and fled. You could hear the scampering of their wiry feet even after the last one had disappeared. Where they went or how they went is a mystery. All we know is that their wicked little eyes were never seen at that house again. Chapter 4. Nutcracker stirred and opened his eyes. He raised himself on one arm. Then he stood up, restored. Restored not only to his full strength, but to his true self. He was no longer dressed like a soldier. He was no longer made of iron. He no longer had a mustache and a high-arched nose. He was a handsome youth dressed in long blue hose, a jacket and slippers of silver, and a little cloak lined with crimson. His hair was cut close, of a ruddy blonde color, almost matching his belt and scabbard of gold. Only his gentle eyes had not changed. They were as deep and round and confident as before. Nutcracker crossed to the far corner of the room and found the velvet slipper that had saved his life, and then to the opposite side where Maria's wrapper hung over the foot of the bed. He put the wrapper around her and slipper on her foot. "Is it you, Nutcracker?" Maria said, so astonished she could only stand and stare. "What does it all mean?" He smiled at her very tenderly. "It means," he said, "that the spell has been broken. I was a young boy who did not appreciate his good fortune. I had health and friends and work to do, but I was so foolish as to be discontented and complain. About all of this all the time. An enchanter deprived me of speech and turned me into a nutcracker so that my mouth would no longer whine, but would serve some kind of purpose until I should learn to be glad of living and being of use. The spell would only be broken when someone realized how much I had changed and believed that I had a new heart under my funny costume of painted iron. It was you, Maria, who broke the enchantment, or rather completed it, for you see, it was a lucky enchantment, since now I do know that it was good and wonderful to be alive." The room became illuminated as the moon began to shine on the snow outside the window. It shone on Maria's slipper and on the golden sword at Nutcracker's side. It shone on all the twinkling ornaments on the Christmas tree. "What is your real name?" Maria asked. "My name is Prince Nikita, but now I like Nutcracker better." "And what are you going to do now?" "I think I shall go on being a nutcracker," he said. "That is as good a job as any, at least for a while." "But if you are a prince, you must live far away. Nutcracker, will you go there?" "No, I want to stay here with you, Maria. Where I live is quite far away, if you think it is far away, but it's only a few steps really. Come, I will show you." One of the tall French windows blew open. Nutcracker lifted his beautiful sword and walked out into the night. Maria was spellbound for a moment, and then as she was about to rise and follow him, her little bed began to move like a sleigh towards the window. She tucked the wrapper and the coverlet close around her. She was quite warm. Without a sound, her bed glided on under the yellow curtains, through the window, out of doors. Have you ever been in a forest in deep winter, when the snow is frozen so hard that you can walk on its glassy surface in green fir and pine trees, wearing endings of snow like white fur? With little tracks of rabbits and birds crisscrossing on the white floor and tiny crystals of ice blinking off like little winter fireflies, when it is so still that you can hear the last movement of twig or shifting snow. Through such a forest, Maria found herself moving in her sleigh bed. Nutcracker strode ahead, his red cloak like a beckoning torch. When it was no longer night and it was snowing again, large flakes that circled around the bed came rushing toward it in a great throng at every new turn in the path. Then Maria saw what she had only glimpsed from the window hours ago. The snow fairies soaring through the air and dancing down the aisles of the forest. They are extraordinarily lovely with their costumes of silver, hoarfrost, and diadems of snowflakes more brilliant than diamonds. They surrounded the sleigh bed, whirling and leaping so close together that it was quite dizzying. Then, at the height of their wild dance, the forest and all its spirit seemed to melt into air. The snow was gone. The path had become a little canal of water, bordered with green plants and colorful flowers. The bed was a boat upon it. Far down the canal, Maria could see a flight of stairs at one side, with Nutcracker waiting on the lowest step. As the little boat bed drew up, he stepped aboard beside Maria, and they sailed on. In the distance, a castle seemed to rise out of the water. It gleamed like a giant party cake. Its walls were made of icing. Over the windows were candy flowers, and peppermint strikes spiraled up the tall towers. At intervals stood statues carved out of marzipan. An archway of golden taffy spanned the canal, and under the boat glided into the castle. It stopped at a flight of broad steps in a great hall made entirely of rock candy in soft pinks and yellows. A stately lady dressed in gleaming white satin stood at the top of the stairs to receive them, and beyond were many men and women dressed as if for a ball. Nutcracker said the lady was a sugar plum fairy, and that this was the forest of sweets. He introduced Maria, and then he told everyone how Maria had saved his life and broken the magic spell. Everyone said she had been very brave. The sugar plum fairy escorted the two children to a table overlooking the rock candy hall. People brought in many delicious and unusual foods, for after their battle with the mice and their trip through the forest, Nutcracker and Maria were very hungry. Each kind of refreshment was so prettily decorated that you could not tell just what it was, but it was better than ice cream or cherry pie or any birthday cake. While they were eating this delectable feast, the court entertained them with music and a series of dances, each representing something good to eat or drink. 2 women in ruffled skirts and 2 men in flaring trousers did the dance of chocolate, which was really a Spanish dance because so much chocolate comes or used to come from Spain. A stern Arab did a slow and rather sleepy dance on a rug. The music and his languid movements made you see that the hot and lonely desert at night. Servants gave him tiny cups of coffee now and then, for the Arabians are great coffee drinkers. Two Chinese girls brought in a box of bamboo, like a tea chest, or out of it vaulted two Asian acrobats. Around and around the candy hall they turned cartwheels and flip-flops. One of them vaulted right over the table where Nutcracker and Maria were sitting. This dance was called the Dance of the Tea because the Chinese loved to drink especially. Next came a number of muscular young men dressed in white and red stripes carrying hoops. This was a dance of great agility and speed. The men seemed to fly through the air as they drove through their whirling hoops. It was the most brilliant dance of all. The music changed to an airy and soaring waltz. A troop of dancers, looking like flowers, floated softly down from balconies and windows between clear sugar columns. They danced as if borne up by a breeze and made you think of a mountain meadow. Finally, the dandelion seeds. They were wafted up one after the other and out between the columns. But now came the most amusing one. How Fritz would have liked it. A very tall woman came jerkily in, wearing the most tremendous skirt, like a huge round candy box. Suddenly, she lifted one part of her skirt, and out came the tiniest children, who tumbled and tripped about, just like dainty bonbons. They were dressed in pink and lavender, pale green and yellow, and there were so many of them. But somehow they all managed to crowd back under the big skirts again, and the candy box lady sidled off. Now the Sugar Plum Fairy came forward with a handsome man to show what they could do. And this was the very best of all, dancing so wonderful that Nutcracker and Maria forgot the caramel sherbet and sat enraptured. Only a dancer could describe the grandeur and charm of those figures, responding to the music perfect unison, creating a pattern of motion that seemed to fill the vast room with advances and retreats, vigor and grace, till you were hypnotized by its splendor. At the climate of the Sugar Plum Fairy, spun like a top at a furious speed, all linked to the room, and was caught up and lifted up triumphantly by her partner. When the applause had subsided, the dancers smiled and beckoned for Nutcracker and Maria to come down. All of the court gathered around, and the children thanked them, bowing low. Chapter 5. As Maria raised her head, she knew that the court was not there. The light was different, and the ballroom floor was the quilt of her bed at home. She opened her eyes wide. The clear light of the morning was streaming into her room. An icicle glittered outside the window pane, and beyond, the sky was intensely blue. There was a faint smell of toast and coffee from downstairs. Then she saw, near the fireplace, her doll's bed, and Nutcracker lying in it, in his general's uniform. He seemed to have just awakened, too, and he was looking right at her. She thought that he smiled. The door to the hall opened, and Maria's mother came in with a tray of food. "How late you have slept, and on Christmas morning. The storm is over, and the whole world is washed clean. We never saw such a beautiful Christmas day." She came over and kissed Maria. "I brought you breakfast in bed, for we were all through downstairs. Are you feeling well?" "Yes, Mother, I am, and thank you for breakfast." What a party it was! I was so excited, I don't remember bringing Nutcracker upstairs. "No, darling, I brought him up early this morning, in one of your slippers. The big room was in such a state. There were gumdrops all over the floor. Mother, is Godfather Drosselmeyer a magician?" "Of course not. He's just a clever and ingenious man who is very fond of you." "But how did he bring Nutcracker alive?" "If Nutcracker came alive, it was because you like him so well, And if you love something very much, it is always alive. What a funny child you are today. Now get washed and dressed and have your breakfast. I'll light the fire. The end. Thank you for joining me for the reading of the Nutcracker. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.